Hey gang, Voltie here. Today we're bringing you another deck for the 8-point series, and today is going to be Abzan Jegantha. Now this is a tried and true mid-range deck. It has a lot of ways to interact with your opponent via hand disruption and removal spells, and a very premium threat base despite the Jegantha restriction. So let's get right into it. To start things off, we have the namesake, obviously, Jegantha the Wellspring. This is one of the companions that I think is much easier to build around than people think. The requirement does cut you off certain things, but it does also lend to having a really potent late game. Basically, if your deck has the ability to run out of gas, having a Jegantha in your command zone is really potent as a way to close games out. For battles, we have an Invasion of Gobekhan. Realistically, this card could be in the sideboard, however, we do have access to several Tarmogoyfs, or Lurgoyfs rather, and having an extra card type is really valuable once you start hitting that 2 to 3 to 4 Lurgoyf requirement. We have Agrist the Hunger Tide. It's incredibly powerful, no surprises here. What is notable are the emissions of certain other Planeswalkers, mostly because of the Jegantha requirement, so we don't get to play Liliana of the Veil, which is a big one. We don't get to play Gideon of the Trials in the sideboard, or Gideon Ally of Zendikar in the main deck. There's a couple of others that you could theoretically be playing, and if you want to get rid of the Jegantha, by all means. However, the way this deck was designed was to use the companion, having the extra card and having a way to get some late game power really allows you to lower your curve and reduce the amount of mana sinks, for example, that you have access to, just because you have an extra card in your hand that you can play. For creatures, our 1-drop slot is pretty slim. We have some cantrips, we have Deathrite, which is our first point, we have a Nethergoyf and a Hex Drinker as ways to close things out. The deck could play a Mother of Runes if you wanted to, however, the way that this deck was designed is that very few of our creatures matter too much. We don't need to be protecting anything like a Thalia, so by having our creatures be more compact, and making sure that each of them has an impact over the course of every game, you're less reliant on something like Mother of Runes, but you absolutely could be playing it. We have a healthy amount of 2-drops. We have a Mosswood Dread Knight, an Orcish Bowmasters as one of our points, Ophelia, a Samwise, Scavenging Ooze, Springheart Nantuko, Stoneforge Mystic, Tarmogoyf, Voice of Resurgence, and White of the Reliquary. White has quite a few ways that you can generate value out of it. Springheart Nantuko and Orcish Bowmasters are the main ways that you can get free bodies, but we obviously also have Agrist the Hunger Tide. The rest of the 2-drops are all individually powerful, with possibly the exception of Voice of Resurgence. However, due to some of the other slots, I do believe that having a 2-drop that represents 2 bodies is impactful. We do have a Birthing Pod, for example, and we do have White, as previously mentioned. For 3-drops, we've got Barragoyf, Graveyard Trespasser, Renegade Rallier, and White Plume Adventurer as 2 of our points. White Plume, Barragoyf, and Graveyard are all individually powerful. Renegade Rallier is an interesting choice, and it might look a bit weird. However, if you do look at our 2-drop slot, it's really condensed and potent. And at the same time, having Renegade Rallier to buy back a land is also just a perfectly reasonable thing to be doing. There's plenty of other ways you can make sure that you're getting a full 2-mana creature out of the deal, mostly with Birthing Pod, but we'll get into that once we get into the non-creatures. To round things out, we have a Seasoned Dungeoneer as an extra point, a Generosant, and a Troll. These will go with our reanimation package, obviously. For sorceries, we have a healthy amount of discard. We have Prismatic Ending, which is one of the reasons to be in white at the moment, and we have Reanimate, which is an extra point. And then for instance, we have 3 interactive removal spells and a Mental Misstep. This deck does have too many non-creatures to reliably play Once Upon a Time, and in the sorcery slot we also don't have a Green Sun Zenith. Both of these are conscious decisions. if you'd like to tinker the deck and reduce the amount of non-creature spells and increase your creature count to play those cards, it's very reasonable. But if you look at the creature count, the Green Sun Zenith doesn't have the ability to get anything incredibly high impact. We don't have the space for a Collector Roof in the main board, and because of Jegantha we can't play Questing Beast, for example. They're also, I mean, if you want, you can play Green Suns, you can play a couple of those cards, and you can swap the Seasoned Dungeoneer out for a Undermountain Adventurer, but I prefer the direction that this deck took during construction. For artifacts, we have our 3 Stoneforge targets. We have a Clamp, we have a Jit, and a Pre-War Formalware. Clamp is one of our points as well. The main reason that these are our equipment of choice. Pre-War is pretty obvious by now. Jit is kind of a free roll, however you could also move it to the sideboard if you wanted to. And Clamp gives us a bit of extra value out of our Orcish Bowmasters and our Springheart Nantuko, as having extra bodies, as well as just being able to equip it to a creature. And the general play pattern of Clamp is that if your opponent, or if you've introduced the initiative, you can put Clamp onto one of your blockers and make it and discourage your opponent from attacking into you to get the initiative. But if they've already taken the initiative from you, you can put Clamp on one of your creatures when you're cracking in, and that way you can guarantee a little bit of value as you get the initiative back. Lastly, we have a Birthing Pod. We do have quite a number of cards in our deck that are conscious of our curve, so we've made sure that there's enough 1s, 2s, and 3s, as well as a 4 that you can get with Pod. Unfortunately, there aren't really any viable 5s in this deck. We can't play Solitude, which would be the best 5 because of Jegantha. We can't play Titania for the same reason, and all of the other 5s kind of suck, if I'm honest. Lastly, we have an Animate Dead. This is to go with our Reanimate, obviously. It is notable that Animate Dead gives us an enchantment, or a second enchantment if you count Springheart and Nantuko, and that does help with those 3 Loggoyfs that we have, Nether, Tarmogoyf, and Barrogoyf. For lands, nothing too crazy. We've got a Boseiju, a Karakas, a Spymaster's Vault as our utility lands. Realistically, you'll be getting Karakas or Spymaster's Vault with White of the Reliquary pretty much every time. However, being able to sacrifice creatures and get a Surveil land and generate a mana advantage is enough to make that card quite powerful. For our sideboard, we've got a pretty stock sideboard for Abzan. We've got all of the major hitters that you would expect in these colours. We have a Carpet of Flowers, a Deafening Silence, a Duress, Haywire Might for a bit of interaction. We have Abrupt Decay, which honestly could be any number of other things if you want. Agatha's Soul Cauldron as our graveyard hate of choice, on top of the other options that we have in the main deck, obviously. We have a Collector Oof. Now, we do have quite a number of artifacts that Oof turns off. However, I've said this before, if you're bringing in Collector Oof, and if it comes into play, it doesn't really matter how many things you're turning off on your own side, because if you're against a deck that Collector Oof is good against, it's going to have enough of an impact to carry you. There's a Containment Priest, a Lion's Sash as a 4th Stoneforge target, as well as a Graveyard Hate piece, a Vanishing Verse as our flex removal slot, an Archon of Emeria for our combo matchups, a Choke for our blue matchups, Lauren, which is a nice little value creature that also works as a disenchant, and an opposition agent for combo decks of that nature as well. There are a number of different things you can do with this deck if you plan on building it for yourself. You can lean into the Reanimation package and play more of those cards. You can lean into the Hate Bears aspect and play a Mother of Runes and a Thalia and go with that. You can also size up the curve and have a little bit more value and potency in the 3 and 4 drop slot. I've chosen to omit them and reduce the curve just because we have access to Jegantha, but obviously if you want to play a mid-range Abzan pile and you don't want to have that companion, then there's plenty of other cards you could be playing. But otherwise, that's it for this deck. As always, the deck list will be in the links below. This video was brought to you with the help and support of my lovely patrons and donors. If you'd like to support me and my content or see your name up here on screen, you can click the links below. If you like the content, please do consider subscribing. It helps out a ton. You'll be notified of upcoming videos, and we can get a bit more traction going to hopefully grow the channel. But otherwise, leave a like if you like the video, and I'll catch you next time.